But the whole purpose, as I said before, the definition of a crisis is it doesn't make sense. You don't have that pattern recognition. And of course, word for word, the countries of Southeast Asia that went through SARS in 2003, which was Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea, they recognized it early. It was rational to them. They could model it. They had a coalition of people who could discuss it. They had a range of potential. COVID was the same. But it's the fact that so that's exactly sort of where I've positioned myself in everything that I do. But surely you want to learn from other people. You shouldn't go through it the second time. Getting it right the second time doesn't count. These are non-recoverable crises now. And you say, well, we're going to screw it up the first time, but we'll get it right next time. That is no longer technical. That's a moral issue. That's a moral issue of you have a duty, you have an obligation of governance to protect the security, safety, and well-being of the people under you're responsible for. So why was that? That's the learning I'm talking about. It's not some magical or voodoo learning. It's those countries got it right because they had been through it. Why could we not learn from those countries? Why was there not that transfer of information or insight? Do you want to come in on that, Robin, and then we'll come to you, Michael?
Yeah,
well, there's also just
Michael,
Robin, just really quick, because I think it's worth addressing, and in context of David's, throwing the ball to you, is the difference between SARS coming out through Hong Kong, which was an open society just out of British control, versus COVID coming out of Wuhan and under a much different type of situation politically, and how much visibility there was. My feeling was that we knew about SARS because it came out of Hong Kong. It was very visible. We were able to take action. I don't get the sense that we had that coming out of Wuhan.
I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree, because again, coming out of Wuhan, the neighboring countries around China were able to respond very quickly and control the epidemic in those countries. Now, obviously, not all societies are the same, and there are many issues we could discuss, but they're not all China under a Communist Party regime. So I think the scenario, certainly in Europe, perhaps in North America, was that they were looking at their neighbors. So, David was saying in the UK, we were looking at Germany and Italy and Spain. We weren't looking at Singapore and learning the lessons there. And I think that's a bit like the Secret Service. When it works well, you don't recognize as a problem. So the fact that the pandemic, that the number of cases were controlled very well in some countries, was actually interpreted as they don't have a problem with COVID, not interpreted as they've coped really well with COVID and put in place things that work. And so they were just looking at the wrong place, not recognizing that actually huge numbers of infections were averted because they'd already been averted by the time people were looking for models.
But that's why you listen to experts, because experts should recognize that. They are the people who should know that. And then you transition that information to maybe politicians didn't recognize it, but people who understood this stuff should understand that stuff. Was there a problem there?
I would broadly agree.
The stuff that's Mike, do you want to come in on that?
Actually, Azeez raised his hand.
Azeez, feel free.
Thank you, David. My opinion here is scientific experts and technical committees in the countries will give technical advice. However, politicians make political decisions. So what is scientifically the best advice may not be what the country practices, because scientists will think of all the science, while politicians will have to think of business, trade, and so many other aspects for the whole country, security, so many other factors. So in my experience, scientific decisions are not always recommendations or advice is not always followed as a political decision making. There are other factors they take. While I have the mic, can I ask Robin one question, which something like which Mike asked? Now, vaccines, we are having RNA vaccines, as you say, is the new in thing for vaccine technology. But there are still countries like India. Indian own vaccine is a whole virus kill vaccine. Chinese vaccine is a whole virus kill vaccine. Now, what is the possibility of whole virus vaccine and RNA vaccine? The antibodies that is formed, will there be a difference in the antibodies and the reactions to variants? Because I imagine RNA vaccine will be exposed to a very narrow part of the virus, while the whole vaccine has more virus particles exposed. So theoretically, it may give better protection for the variants. This is just an unscientific thought I have. Thank you.
That's a great question. Not all vaccines are the same, and they all have strengths and weaknesses. The RNA technology is useful because it's fast. It has the drawback that the current versions are, not very good for low-income countries because they're costly because of the commercial partners that have developed them, and they need to be frozen. The inactivated viral vaccines appear to work. Their efficacy doesn't seem to be as high in terms of preventing any disease. I think the jury's still a little bit out in terms of their ability to prevent hospitalization, severe disease, and the relative merits of both. Theoretically, they may be better against a variant or may lose less potency because you are targeting other parts of the virus. And we could have a very interesting conversation about whether antibodies which prevent infection versus T cells that may prevent severe disease, what role and what different value you might give them. So it's a mixed picture, and I wouldn't want to say any of these vaccines doesn't have its place or its value.
Anybody like to go in? Mike?
There's definitely a lot of variability and a lot we don't know. And again, people have to remember that we've been dealing with this just over a year. This is not something that we've been working on for decades necessarily, although, certainly with SARS and, like you said, your experience and other people's experience developing vaccines for SARS is certainly probably, you're just not anxiously waiting for an opportunity, but this was a great opportunity to further that science and build on that science, which is fantastic. But one of the questions that I think that, at least in my mind, that comes up is, David sort of posed this at the beginning, what's the future look like? And one of the questions that certainly needs to come up, and there's no single right answer, is endemic versus pandemic. Are we going to just see this pandemic just peter out and disappear like SARS did, or is this going to be an endemic situation like influenza? I mean, we look at the amount of influenza in the United States is basically dropped to nothing. And people will have their conspiracy theories on it, everything's being coded COVID and this, that, and the other. But, some viruses tend to kind of muscle other viruses out of the way. So if COVID's a little more infectious, it's pushed influenza out of the way. So we've gone from 65,000 cases, or I wish I knew this off the top of my head, 65,000 either cases, but I think 65,000 deaths from influenza last year to less than 2,000 this year. Is that, a hospital medical coding situation? I don't think so. I think it's more a combination of we're wearing masks, we're doing the isolation, we're doing all those other measures, as well as the virus, COVID's basically kind of taking up all the air in the room, if you will, and not allowed influenza to propagate like it normally does on a yearly basis. So I guess the real question, and Robin, you may be the best one to opine on this, is, are we looking at endemic, similar to flu, where we're going to see next year's variant's going to be a little bit different. I realize the H1N1, the H side and the N side of influenza, there's the shifts, on year to year, and then occasionally the big leaps like swine flu or bird flu. But do you think we're facing an endemic situation 5 years from now with maybe variants?
So let me start with the influenza discussion, because we know that influenza is not transmitted as efficiently as COVID-19. So, in terms we all discuss R0, it's quite different. And
right, so it kind of got pushed out, right?
Yeah, but pushed out probably because social distancing has had a bigger impact on influenza than COVID-19. And also COVID-19 has had such a dramatic impact in terms of deaths in the elderly. There are many elderly people who might have died from influenza if they had not died of COVID-19. So in that respect, it's not that it's out-competed it as a virus, but it's a combination of human behavior and differences in transmission rates. The issue about endemic, does it become endemic? I mean, the first thing to recognize is that as viruses change, the trend is that viruses tend to be pushed to be more transmissible, but less pathogenic. And I suspect that the most likely scenario, and it's always crystal ball gazing, the most likely scenario is that this virus will become less pathogenic, probably more transmissible. We will, hopefully, the majority of people will have a background of immunity from natural infection or vaccination. It's unclear to me now whether that will actually lead to dramatically driving down this virus so much that we won't need continual vaccination, or whether we will need booster campaigns. But so far, the evidence suggests it will not change as readily as influenza. And we already know we can keep on top of influenza by updating the vaccine on an annual basis. So that brings some comfort. And I think that I would be more worried that a completely new coronavirus comes along rather than this current coronavirus changing in a very dramatic way that renders all vaccines obsolete and means that we can't, put another vaccine out there within a couple of months.
I think it was Neil Burrs, the physicist, who said prediction is always difficult, especially when it's about the future. And I think
I thought Yogi Berra said that.
Sorry?
I thought the baseball player Yogi Berra said that.
I'm sure he said it probably better, but there you go. Of course, the thing about science, the thing about science is give me the data, give me the data. For example, Robin, in the UK, I think you confirm this. It's deaths within 28 days of a positive result. So if you have a positive result and 2 days later you get knocked down by a bus, you are still a COVID. That is a COVID death because 28 days within. Is that true, Robin?
I don't know that that's true.
Okay, I must have read that in the Sun for some reason. I don't know why that's not true. But the thing about it is there's some serious questions about the data, and also what's very much happening now. We see that already. There's some pretty significant rewriting of history. I mean, history which is within the living memory about who said what and when they said it and what it meant when they said it. And we're seeing some pretty significant rewriting, which is worrying. Which is why I think, if I might say so, I think reports, the COVID-19 campfires of the ISRM, which is recorded and sort of we have that as a genuinely longitudinal study, real-time longitudinal study. We can say, well, that's not what happened on that particular week because we've got a record of it. Azeez, we'll bring you in, please, and then we'll go to a couple of questions coming, which is good. Alan, thanks for that. Daniel, thanks for that. And then, so we'll come to you, Dr. Azeez, and then we'll go to the questions for the last few minutes. Please.
Thank you. It's following up to Mike's question, whether we'll end up in a endemic situation or not. And my question to Robin is, we had 100 years back, we had the Spanish flu pandemic, and it got controlled over 3 to 4 years, I think, maybe a little longer, without any vaccine. And what was how did it end up? Do we have any scientific knowledge on how it ended up. Was it the virus got weakened, or it spread so much around the world, everybody had the infection, and 30 million people died who was susceptible. So why are we always comparing the SARS? Because it's because the SARS kind of virus we are having now. Will it not die down like the Spanish flu 100 years back? Thank you.
So yeah, great question. I mean, Spanish flu essentially, and we need to remember it didn't originate in Spain. So I always feel sorry for the Spanish being labelled with the 1918 epidemic.
The Kansas flu, right?
Yeah, but essentially, you're right. It went around the world. We had at least 3 waves, which is interesting. The second wave was bigger, and people were surprised that the second wave of COVID-19 was bigger than the first wave, which surprises me. And obviously, it killed a large number of people. But eventually everybody had seen the virus and had had a level of immunity. So if this current pandemic, we had done nothing, it would have killed a very large number of people, but it wouldn't have killed everybody because most people have either no disease or mild disease. And so ultimately everybody would have had a background of immunity and it would have become controlled. But we are in a position where we can save lives in a way that we couldn't with the Spanish flu. And so, while history is history, we now have a moral imperative to prevent deaths and serious illnesses with the technology we have to hand.